1991. Night had fallen, and the sky above Baghdad looked calm. The city seemed asleep, streets were silent, and people were waiting for another ordinary morning. But no one knew that within seconds, history was about to change. Suddenly, the sky lit up. A powerful explosion shook the entire city. Missiles crossed the darkness, leaving bright trails behind them. At that moment, a new chapter of history began. Millions of people sat in front of their televisions watching a war unfold live. This was not just another conflict. This was the first major war of the modern technological era. This event would later be known as Operation Desert Storm. By the late 1980s, Iraq was in a difficult situation. 8 years of war with Iran had exhausted the country economically and socially. Cities were damaged, the economy weakened, and the people were tired of conflict. President Saddam Hussein faced one crucial question: how could the nation recover? The answer seemed simple: oil. But oil itself became the reason for a new crisis. Neighboring Kuwait increased its oil production. As global oil prices dropped, Iraq found itself under severe economic pressure. Saddam Hussein did not see this as a coincidence. He accused Kuwait of waging an economic war against Iraq. Tensions slowly continued to rise. On August 2, 1990, before sunrise, Iraqi forces crossed the Kuwaiti border. Tanks moved across the desert, military vehicles advanced forward. Within hours, the capital was captured. Kuwait's army could not resist for long. The world watched in shock. The invasion was seen as a direct challenge to international order. The United Nations quickly held emergency meetings and imposed sanctions against Iraq. But Iraq did not withdraw. War was becoming inevitable. U.S. President George Bush began forming an international coalition. Within a short time, dozens of countries joined together. Saudi Arabia became filled with hundreds of thousands of troops. Tanks, aircraft, and advanced weapons flowed into the desert. This preparation became known as Operation Desert Shield. The world could feel that a massive confrontation was approaching. On January 17, 1991, in the middle of the night, the operation began. Stealth aircraft rose into the sky, nearly invisible to radar systems. The first missile was launched, then another, and another. The sky above Baghdad flashed with explosions. Television cameras broadcast the war live. For the first time in history, people watched a conflict unfold in real time. Days passed. Airstrikes continued, power stations were destroyed, communication systems collapsed, and military bases were systematically eliminated. The Iraqi army was large in numbers but technologically outmatched. Slowly, the war began turning into a one-sided battle. Iraq responded by launching missiles. Some reached distant regions, raising global fears that the conflict could spread further. For several days, the entire world watched while holding its breath. In February 1991, the ground offensive began. Coalition forces moved rapidly across the desert. Tanks advanced over the sand while helicopters dominated the skies. Defensive lines were broken. In just 100 hours, the outcome of the war was decided. Iraqi forces retreated and Kuwait was liberated. But during their retreat, Iraqi troops set fire to hundreds of oil wells. Thick black smoke covered the desert sky. The sun disappeared behind darkness and day began to look like night. It became one of the largest environmental disasters in history. On February 28, 1991, a ceasefire was announced. The war had ended. The coalition achieved victory. Yet many questions remained. Why was Saddam Hussein still in power? Would this decision lead to future conflicts? The war was short, but its consequences lasted for years. Economic sanctions were imposed on Iraq. Ordinary civilians faced hardship. The political balance of the Middle East changed. The world had entered a new era. the era of technological warfare. Operation Desert Storm showed how modern wars would be fought. War was no longer limited to the battlefield. It existed on television screens, in information networks, and in human minds. The war ended, but its mark on history never disappeared, because behind every explosion, there is always a human story.
يلا جوزوا منا
لا تطويلي حكي وياك
قررت